Okay, everybody, we'll get this meeting of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council underway, so I'd like to welcome you all here. And Mr Mohi, would you please open our meeting for us?
Me no tata, I hoka ra mātou ki a koe tēnei ata. Manaki tia I a mātou I ko ole reo ngā me e pāna ki a ka munu whānui. Ko te tūmana ko te ngāka o katai te rangi maare ki a mātou aha ko te rere ke o mātou whakaarawa ki te tihi ki te tihi. Ho mai taka ki tō mātou Chairman Rex ki a whakaarahi a mātou I te rahi pai. No reira, koe nei mea ka pātai ke runga te ingo I korati a ka amene.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. Do we have any apologies? No apologies. Then we'll move to notices. Do we have any notices? Alan?
Can you use your microphone, please?
Debbie, you need to do your job on Alan's microphone, please.
At the Regional Council, at the Transport Committee on Friday, there is an agenda item relating to the Manawatu Gorge issues and options, and there'll be a presentation from the new NZTA Regional Director, which could be an interactive one. So a number of councillors have indicated interest in that topic. So if they'd like to come along and have a listen to that, and even provide some input on in a discreet sort of way, that will happen at 10:45 on Friday morning.
Thank you, Alan. Anyone that's interested, probably, well, Alan's given you the date, you can just come along. Any other notices? I have one. We have a late item that we are going to deal with first, so it comes under decision item. We'll deal with that the first on Ruataniwha water storage scheme, so we will do that first. Second one, I apologise you got Chairman's report late. It's now in front of you. I will expect you will read it and memorise it, of course, and ask any questions. And Rick, of course, who was the chair for 2 weeks, I don't know whether he dropped anything into your email. That was excellent. His report was excellent, Mike said. Okay, so we'll move on from there because we don't have to. We have nothing to declare. Any conflict of interest other than any changes of conflict of interest, any change of status? There are none. We will move to confirmation of the minutes for the previous meeting.
So I have the wrong date. The 26th of July, and it should be the 22nd.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes, don't we? Because we have the 22nd, yeah.
If we do the July, 26th of July.
Okay, so we have 2 sets of minutes because we have the minutes from the meeting last week as well. So the minutes from the 26th of July, which I didn't attend, I'll assume that they've been read. Are there any corrections? Do we have a mover to move those minutes? That's correct. Fenton, a seconder, please. Paul Bailey, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Are there any matters on those minutes that that we aren't in the agenda that you wish to raise? Or I guess we can do that on minor businesses, so we'll leave that for minor businesses. Okay, so we approve those. All those in favour of approving those minutes? Aye. Now we have the minutes on the 22nd at the Anchorage Motor Lodge. For corrections? No corrections. Do we have a mover to say those minutes are correct? Bit of a pause. Councillor Bailey, seconder. Second by Councillor Bevan. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Those minutes are carried. So we confirming both those sets of minutes. Item 4, follow-ups from the previous council meeting.
Chair, can I suggest that we take those as read? Happy to take any questions in relation to those if councillors wish. I do note item number 8. We could do with some guidance around a replacement for Councillor Dick on the HBUD's implementation working group. So if there are any volunteers from council that would like to put their name forward, we can either just adopt that formally by resolution now, or we can come back with a formal paper if council so wishes.
So just remind me who's on it. I'm on, don't I? Tom? Just Tom?
It was Tom and Alan were the two representatives, and Alan was essentially, I guess you could call the Napier representative, although there's no particular reason. Right.
I'm the noisy one, but that would give us, if I was nominated, it would give us two from Hastings. That's
So
all.
you're here at Tonga, mate. You're not Hastings.
All right, well,
Well, I would nominate Peter Bevan. Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder? A thirder. All those in favour that Peter Bevan replaces Alan. Alan is voluntarily dropping back. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Peter Bevan is now on that. Are you happy with that
That's
process?
excellent, thank you, Chair. So look, happy to take any questions on the follow-ups if anybody has any.
I just have a question on those Lukoima requests. Just want to declare that Charlotte is not my mother or sister or any relation. But it seems that that is a very wide-ranging request, from disaster preparedness to homeless to... How do we deal with that sort of request? It's a novel.
Chair, we, under our responsibilities for civil defence and emergency management, we have a range of preparedness activities and plans that certainly address vulnerable communities. There is work going on with the likes of rest homes and
So you can cope with this. That's all.
Look, I would say that there people who are in assisted living are very much a focus for our civil defence and emergency management, and we do know where those people in the community reside, and there are planning efforts to ensure that there are plans in place for natural disasters. Getting to homeless, transient, rough sleeping people, etc., is possibly pushing the boundaries in terms of our current focus and capability. But look, this Lukoima request will be prompting some discussion with the Civil Defence Group to think about whether we have our bases covered in this area.
Okay.
Tom had a question on the
Tom,
follow-ups.
did you have a...
Yeah, just a question on number 3, the Joint Committee on Drinking Water meeting planned for October. It seems like the meeting schedule is not as ambitious as the urgency of the issues, is it not? Why not getting organized till October?
Look, it could potentially happen before the end of September. We've just got to coordinate the diaries of councillors from 5 different councils, and we also need the joint working group to meet and prepare papers and advice through to the inaugural meeting, and so we judge that will take us till about October. It's possible it could happen more earlier. Can I assure the councillor that there is urgency with respect to the preparation of the committee's work, but we've just got some ducks to get lined up before the committee first meets.
Can you just remind me what's the current expectation as to when the inquiry is making its next step?
So
any kind of report
so they've very much finished their hearings and deliberations and are now in report writing, and they are due to provide that to the government in December, not till December. Yeah. And we certainly expect that the heavy lifting for the committee will arise from the recommendations that come from the inquiry.
thank you, Chair. James, you mentioned that 5 council coordinating
the calendar of five different councils. So I assume from that CHB and Wairoa District Councils have come on board with the committee?
That's correct.
Mr Chair, James, is it still with Hastings?
No, we have volunteered to be the administering authority for the Drinking Water Committee on the basis that it's a regional committee and our whole of region function. I think also, given Hastings has its hands full with its own drinking water management challenges, they were very happy for us to volunteer that effectively to be the Secretariat.
What's its status and where does it sit now?
So it continues to operate and meet, and it has a work program it's presently working through, and it will be the prime source of advice to the Joint Committee. So it will be appearing before the Joint Committee, it will be outlining its work program, and it will be providing a rolling schedule of reports and advice to the Joint Committee.
Debbie, yeah, can you please look after me better, Debbie? Paul, and then Tom, then Debbie.
Just an update on Tūtera.
Tūtera. Tom?
Waipukurau stink.
Debbie?
The Chinese sister city delegation visit.
Chinese visit, is it? Any other minor items? Okay. We will deal with them. So I'd like to move straight to the decision item number 16, Ruataniwha Water Storage Scheme financial treatments. Everyone would have, and we have here, yes, this Tom has formally asked that, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps, look, I'll just introduce the paper. The paper before you is a response to the discussions that councillors have had and council staff have had with management and the board of HBRIC. HBRIC were asked by the council to give some thought to the future of the RWSS following the Supreme Court decision. The company is of the view that the scheme is best placed being progressed in any way that it may be progressed, and there are obviously significant impediments to it progressing by a third party that may see its way through to construction. That obviously has statutory impediments which are difficult to overcome, but it may be possible at some point in the future that somebody is able to make a go of it. So on the basis of that, the Board of HBRIC is recommending, and has the support of staff, that the council make no further investment in the RWSS and the company be supported in finding a third party that may be willing to take the project forward. So it signals the end of the road in terms of the council's financial support for the scheme going forward, and as a consequence of that, the $14 million in advanced capital to HBRIC to develop the scheme has no sustainable value on the balance sheet as an asset, given the inability of the company in the foreseeable future to repay what is effectively a loan. and therefore as we finalise the annual report for the 16-17 year with respect to our financial accounts, the advice from our auditors is that it would be appropriate at this point in time to write down the value of that advance, and the advice to you today is to write it down in full. Consequently, HBRIC will also be and is going through the process of revaluing the assets that have been sitting on its balance sheet, which is $19.5 million for the intellectual property and the resource consents associated with the Ruataniwha water storage scheme. They have not yet landed definitively on the end value that will be in their annual report, and we will report that through to you in due course. But it is fair to say that they are expecting a significant impairment on the value of the residual assets that they hold. So at this point in time, our advice to you is that it would be prudent to write off the $14 million advance to date. And in doing so, I should just note, and this wasn't covered in your paper, it is bound up with the process we have to finalise the draft annual report for consultation with the auditors, which will then come back in due course through the Corporate and Strategic Committee, the finalisation of the annual report. In there, you will possibly have seen on page 149 that there is $831,000 of council costs which have been capitalised over recent years in relation to evaluating the council's investment in the Ruataniwha water storage scheme. That has been work that involved Deloitte's advice through to council, the review of the Ruataniwha water storage scheme, and various bits of particularly commercial and financial advice that the council has sought over the last few years as it's gone along. Now, those costs had been capitalised into the balance sheet on the basis of being associated with the council's investment in the scheme. That $831,000 will also need to be written off in the process of finalising the annual report. So while the decision before you today is one that you need to proactively take, which is authorising the write-off of the $14 million, the $831,000 in addition to that will be just a consequence of financial treatments going through the finalisation of the year-end annual report.
Okay. The way I want to handle this is, firstly, are there any questions for James or anybody else on this without long speeches, which we can hold until we move the recommendations either as a bulk or singly, and I know there's some views on that. So just questions. Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you to the CFO. So the advice is to write this off, but was there also a view on just impairing it on the books as far as the auditor was concerned?
So the advice we've received, the preference is to write down the full amount, and that's because there's new tax legislation which allows for 100% shareholders to fully forgive debt in its entirety without any tax implications. If we go down a route of partial forgiveness of the debt, there will be tax implications where HBRIC will have to recognise it as revenue in their books. If we believe that the likelihood is that then the remainder will eventually also get written down, that will also be taxable. So there's benefits to writing the full amount down now. Pardon?
Settle down. We're going around the table, coming down to you, Alan. So Peter. Oh, sorry. We'll come right back.
Thank you, Chair. So my question relates to the possible future sale of the IP if someone else wants to pick this up and continue it. It's highly unlikely that any sale would be possible for some time, because until there is a clear opportunity to resolve the land swap blockage, I don't believe anybody would buy it. And I note in this paper it says that the cost of maintaining the asset, if you like, is $100,000 annually. I'm interested to understand how that cost has been arrived at, because I'm pretty reluctant for this council to spend a whole lot more money on this for any significant period of time, if there's not much chance of anybody ever picking it up. So can you just elaborate a little bit on how this $100,000 is made up?
Councillor, looking at 100,000, that's possibly slightly lighter than I thought it was. But look, if the advice from HBRIC in finality was that 100,000 is about right, well, that's fine. There are two critical components to it. The first of which is that as the consent holder, HBRIC is currently being charged Section 36 charges for science monitoring in the catchment. Notable on that is that at the point that HBRIC no longer holds those consents, and in the event that nobody held the consents, for example, if they were surrendered, those costs would fall back to the other land users in the area. So HBRIC is currently carrying a significant proportion of the science costs for monitoring fresh water in the Ruataniwha Basin. So that's number one. And the second thing relates to Tranche 2 water. As the councillor would be aware, Tranche 2 water is an important component of the overall scheme viability, and HBRIC does have a consent application currently before the council for that water, and that funding includes provision for finalising the additional information that's been requested by the council to advance that resource consent.
So if the consent application for Tranche 2 water was dropped or conceded by HBRIC, what would the remaining charges annually consist of? Would it be 50% of it?
No, I understood it was about $70,000 was the Section 36 charges, which is why I was just looking at the 100,000, slightly sideways then.
Right.
I had a figure of more like 150,000 in mind, but I assume that in finalising the paper in consultation with HBRIC, that was the final number that was arrived. Obviously a paper that was developed in some haste late last week.
Right. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just to follow up from that, James, the monitoring science, the 70k per year for the monitoring science, if the scheme were not to proceed, would that still necessarily have to be done? But as you said, it would be picked up. That's a cost that would be picked up by the landowners rather than by the council.
So councillor, the science would continue. It's just that the cost wouldn't fall necessarily to that consent if it had been relinquished, and those costs would then be distributed across the balance of the consent holders in the catchment under the zone-based variable approach we have for Section 36 recoveries.
So what? Sorry, just to follow up from that, so I'll get it clear in my mind. So if we were to park the scheme, that 70 grand cost would fall on the council at the end of the day because it would come through HBRIC rather than being passed on to the landowners who are benefiting from that.
So we work retrospectively, so a year, we bill for the year that's been, not the year in advance. So HBRIC are liable for some costs at the moment and would be until the 30th of June next year. If the consent was relinquished or handed in or given away, then the costs associated with that were recovered for the zone-based charges that were recovered via the HBRIC consent would then be redistributed across the balance of existing consent holders or remaining consent holders in the catchment.
Okay.
So that because the science work carries on,
Yep.
we don't stop it because one consent lapses or is relinquished. The work carries on, it's just distributed across the remaining
Okay, thanks for
consent holders.
that. Just another question, Chair. Just to make it clear to James, paragraph 6 talks about the intangible asset of 19.5 million. That, I take it, is based on the costs that have been incurred to date on the scheme by HBRIC?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
so
their total expenditure on the scheme.
so would it be fair to say if we also added in this 830k for that's been incurred by the council, you're talking about total costs of about 20.3 million?
That's correct.
That's correct. And then on paragraph 5, it talks about $7 million of general charges. I take it that's the $7 million that's been spent on science and whatever on the Ruataniwha aquifer and the Tuki, which is of benefit to the council, regardless of whether the scheme proceeds or not.
You're talking about the journal charges?
Yeah.
I couldn't answer that question. I don't know, Jess, whether you're in a position to.
I don't know the specific details of what made up the 7 million journal, but that's referring, I guess, in terms of the 14 million total liability that we've advanced.
Yep.
So that was made up of 7 million cash and 7 million journaled expenses, which we had already incurred. I don't have the specifics, sorry, of the...
From what I know
Size.
of the nature of that expenditure, I don't think we're talking about work that is directly of benefit to the council and its regulatory functions. We're talking just literally the vast majority of the $14 million has been spent on the development of the scheme. So the design, the commercial negotiations, the legal aspects of all of that. So very much related to the scheme, not to Plan Change 6.
Okay, so I just wanted to make it clear in my mind, at the end of the day, the total cost of the scheme to the council and HBRIC or whatever, however that works out, is about $20 million, so.
Correct.
Rick, do you have a question? Debbie?
Thank you. I have three. James, I'm wondering why we haven't waited for HBRIC's indication on what the write-down will be so that we're aligned with them before we've come up with a $14 million figure to write down.
So, look, we're bringing this to you today because we need to finalise the draft annual plan to consult the auditors. They are in the process of doing the same simultaneously, and we're just probably a week or two out. We had hoped to get that definitively to you today, the number, in terms of their write-down, and late last week they advised us that they just still hadn't landed it with their own auditors, which is the reason you don't have it today.
Okay, and this is quite a significant decision, so why hasn't it been through our Finance, Audit and Risk Committee for them to be making a recommendation to Council?
Again, it's a timing question. The final annual report in which this will be ultimately expressed will be going through the Finance and Audit and Risk Committee for final sign-off. So what we're doing today is we're making a decision in relation to its treatment in the draft annual plan to go to the auditors, and that step will happen in due course.
All right. When we look at recommendations number 3 and we're resolving no further capital was invested in Ruataniwha, and also the intention that we support it to be on-sold. Is that not in effect untagging the 66 million that's in our long-term plan, and if so, why are we not consulting on that?
It is, let me say, I don't think it's yet untagging. I think untagging it is a decision that would need to be taken through the long-term plan. The financial strategy and the current long-term plan exists until the end of the long-term plan period. We're currently managing the unallocated $66 million as cash through term deposits, and that has been the practice all the way along as the scheme has progressed through its development phase. So nothing else changes in that regard because the conditions precedent have not been met and the scheme is not proceeding, particularly in relation to the Supreme Court decision. I think that's consistent with what was consulted on, which, as I understand it, was a conditional investment by the council. So the council would be progressing the scheme and putting $80 million into the scheme, subject to various things happening. Now, those things, particularly in relation to access to the land, has not come about. So in a sense, we're not non-compliant with the position that was consulted on. But you're quite right, for a decision to apply the 66 million to a new purpose, that will require consultation, and that's very much planned through the long-term plan at this point in time. So perhaps if I could just be extra explicit about it, if the council wanted to resolve to put the $66 million into a new investment opportunity in the near term, we would advise you that that would need consultation. While we continue to hold the cash, particularly going into the long-term plan process, it's my view that we don't need to consult on the decision to do that.
Is that your 3 questions, Debbie?
Thank you.
Alan?
Finished? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just be reminded, and I might have this wrong, but I had a feeling that the part of the reason for the resolution to write off the $14 million debt was to allow the dividend from the port to progress through HBRIC to the council unhindered, is it the word?
Unencumbered.
That's correct.
That is correct?
Yep.
Okay, so if we didn't write that off, there'd be an issue as to whether the council could actually receive the full dividend.
Yeah, so I think audit, an audit recommendation is that we need to impair at least a significant amount of the 14 million. If we were to convert that to a loan, then the dividend, the next dividend would be required to pay down the loan, which would affect our income, our ability to recognise the dividend as income. So,
Thank you.
Neil, then Tom.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Continuing on from Councillor Dick's line of questioning on particular interest, and perhaps Ms Allen could help me out here. I'm interested in the state of HBRIC, given the write-down of 40 million of Regional Council HBRC debt, but we're left with a current asset of 19.5 less 14, so we're left with 5.5 on their books. Is that correct?
they're still working through what their final write-down will
But
be.
on the
so
face of what we know today, that would be...
There's certainly no indication that they're writing down full 14 million. What they're valuing the asset at is yet to be determined. It would likely be a different number than the remaining 5.5.
Doing the maths here, given that HBRIC has got a debt, an external debt of 5.5, notwithstanding your comment as to the write-down on their books, it occurs to me that we've got, with a downward valuation, essentially would leave HBRIC in a liability situation. Their liabilities exceed their assets, and they've got ongoing costs. What is the intent? Are they requiring to clip the ticket on the port dividend to remain solvent?
I think the advice we've received is that no, they wouldn't be needing to affect the dividend. The dividend wouldn't be affected in terms of remaining solvent. Based on our last meeting, the value, they were looking at a value which was greater than the 5.5 million of the asset.
But they're still needing liquidity. They need some money, and they've got a debt of 5.5.
The port are on their balance sheet.
Say again.
The assets of the port are on their balance sheet.
Notwithstanding that, they're unable to access that if they do not touch the dividend. So they've got commitments in terms of the debt servicing on of the 5.5 million, and they've got own operating expenses as well. So where are they going to get the money to meet their commitments?
Councillor, it's possibly a question that needs to be put to HBRIC directly. My understanding is that they may take some portion of the dividend they receive from the port and provide it through if they've got the ability to do so, and they also have the ability to borrow more. So they have significantly more assets than liabilities. The question arises in relation to their ability at any point in time to service particularly the debt to the council. So that the advance to the council was on demand. It wasn't a term specific advance, and the consequence of that in terms of accounting treatment is because it's on demand, they need to be in a position to be able to pay that, and and therefore they don't have an ability to pay back the 14 million at this point in time, hence the recommendation that it be written off.
So be it. However, we've still left with a problem that the two sources of revenue for them are either the port dividend or borrowing. Is that the answer?
That is the answer, and at this and I would make the observation that that's not a sustainable position for HBRIC to be in the longer term, hence the work of the capital review at the moment, looking at the future operations of HBRIC, and they will likely require an injection in capital if they are to go forward and do other things.
Or is this council will be asked to fund the debt? Is that likely?
When you say the debt,
well, they owe 5.5.
The 5.5. So that's a decision that the board will need to make in due course. At the moment, they're able to service the 5.5 based on their limited income, but ultimately that's a debt held by the group in terms of it's a HBRIC is part of the council's group, and so indirectly it is council's debt as well. They don't have any plans to repay that in the short term that I'm aware of.
Tom?
Yeah, I have a number of questions related to the ongoing HBRIC role in this, some of which probably would be better answered by HBRIC, but there are a few that I think you could take a stab at. From what was said a bit earlier, I understand that you're saying a large portion of the 100,000 per annum attaches to the fact that as long as HBRIC holds the consents, it has to service conditions on those consents. Those consents have another 8 years or so to run. I think they were granted in 2015, correct? So they survive as matters now stand till 2025, right?
Well, I don't have the dates in front of me. Under normal circumstances, consents need to be exercised within 5 years. I don't know whether Mr. Maxwell.
It was 10
it's
years,
on
I
a
think, in
10-year
this
basis.
case.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
So that means as long as HBRIC were to simply sit and hold the consents with nothing else happening, no buyer appearing or whatever, we're actually committing to maybe $800,000 since we have to undertake condition fulfillment as long as we hold the consents, correct?
That's correct.
If the consents, if someone were to materialize with, Peter Butler shows up with a check for $300 million, and HBRIC is eager to hand over the consents to him, what test would this new sponsor have to meet to be a credible sponsor of the project? The conditions were set by a board of inquiry that was looking at HBRIC as a robust creature, wholly supported by, in its technical capabilities and so forth, basically by the regional council. The regional council is saying now, we don't want to be a party to this any longer. So is there, if a customer shows up on our doorstep, does the customer need to satisfy anyone that they are actually capable of executing those consents and the conditions around them as the Board of Inquiry anticipated?
Well, from a council perspective, any future consent holder will have to meet the full range of consent conditions that are required of them, and a number of those involve an entity having quite significant capacity, financial capacity. As the councillor will be aware, there are a range of conditions in the consents which require actions and activities that will require investment. So to meet those consent conditions going forward, they'll have to have the wherewithal to do it. If there is an intention to transfer the consents to a new party, that is something which the council could have some influence over in terms of whether we considered the transfer to the party to be viable with respect to their ability to meet those consent conditions. So that is something that could happen in the future. What conditions the HBRIC would want to impose on any party, or what expectations they would have, would be very much over to them to determine.
So normally consents get transferred. This is, I'm selling my, my 10 hectare orchard, and I have a bore on it, and I'm handing over the consent to continue drawing water to the next guy that comes along and buys my property. This is a bit bigger proposition. So would there, have we had any advice, or do we know whether a transfer like this would be legally challenged, or would there be standing for someone to say, a third party to say, I don't have confidence in this particular sponsor being able to execute this to the standards we expect, and we're going to go to some court to block it. Is that a possibility?
Look, at the outside, a judicial review of council's decision to approve a transfer is hypothetically possible. We certainly haven't taken advice on that, and it's not a substantive matter that we would be concerned about at this point in time. It's certainly something which we would be likely to want to investigate as we approached the distinct possibility of an entity coming on board if we had concerns about that entity.
So, the last question, Mr. Chairman, this intellectual property that we're talking about here, what's your professional opinion of the shelf life of that intellectual property? The science work for this project was done years ago at this point. What we're seeing in the tank process is much more robust work being done to support what we're aiming to do. So it strikes me that the intellectual property here has the shelf life of maybe a loaf of bread, because a new applicant would have to basically revisit most of the underlying science and environmental issues that were investigated to get this over the hump in the first place. Would that be a fair assessment?
I wouldn't expect there would be a large amount of revisitation of the science required. The consents have been issued and the consents exist, and the work's been undertaken, and significant investment by this council, which is the very matter before us today. Millions of dollars of investment to amass that science and all the technical design work that went through the Board of Inquiry. That's been undertaken, the consents have been issued. Certainly there is new information, and there's always new information arising from science monitoring in the catchment, which is enriching our understanding of the conditions down there. But the work to get the consents has been undertaken. It met the satisfaction of the Board of Inquiry, with obviously a range of conditions attached to that. Those conditions and consents are live today. So a new party taking up those consents and wanting to exercise them would not need to do significantly more work other than the large body of work that does sit inside those consent conditions, which is an ongoing requirement of any consent holder progressing the scheme.
James, as we've seen in the tank process, even in the last 2 years, the hydrology work, as a for instance, has bounced all over the place, actually, in terms of where it started, where it's wound up, back and forth. It moves back and forth, so I'm not sure how anyone could attach any credibility at this stage to the work done 4 or 5 years ago. Our state of understanding seems to have accelerated dramatically.
Councillor, look, can I just make the observation that there are thousands of resource consents issued all across our landscape that were issued at a point in time when science knowledge was as it was at that moment. New information has arisen, but the Resource Management Act doesn't enable us to continually revise resource consents as new information becomes available.
I've got 3 questions all connected for the Chief Executive, and it follows up on the questions from Councillor Belford. When Councillor Belford's questions about the suitability of a future party to pick up the scheme, isn't his question really around the parallel, a fit and proper person test, which we have for a number of occupations, to be a police officer, look after children, to have a firearms licence, etc. There's a fit and proper person test. And what he seems to be asking is, do we have a fit and proper company test for undertaking these things? And my instinct is that no, but I'd like your view on that. The second element of this is criteria for taking it on and on selling. Wouldn't it be the criteria simply be a bankable cheque with a number in front of it, with a suitable number of zeros after it, be the criteria? And the third element of it, that if the entity taking it on proving responsibility, wouldn't that be the responsibility of this council as a regulator to do that? So we would move away from being an investor to being entirely a regulator. So if it wasn't working as it should do, it would be this council's responsibility to make sure it did, or it was shut down.
So just running through those three questions, the fit and proper person test, we don't have a fit and proper company test, if you like, but the Resource Management Act does enable us to make a judgment on issuing a resource consent, whether or not the consent conditions that we issue could be met, and whether the party receiving the resource consent is, has the wherewithal, if you like, to implement that. Yep.
That is advice which goes quite contrary to what we were given over the consents for the sewerage ponds in Central Hawke's Bay. That we were told we couldn't do that, we could only deal with it in terms that they had to meet the test or not. We could not go past that line. You give me different advice here.
So, look, I might defer to Ian on this, but my understanding is that in issuing a resource consent, we do have the ability to take into account whether or not the person receiving the consent does have the ability to fulfil the consent conditions. Have I got that wrong?
Two things, I think, in response to Central Hawke's Bay. So the issue there was that what we couldn't do is prescribe to them the method of achieving the water quality outcomes that were required. So we couldn't say you need to build this sort of treatment. The consent prescribed the outcome. Those are the conditions, those are the limits, you must meet those. How they choose to do that was their call. No. In terms of assessing what the process doesn't do is assess the individual, but it is, or the company. It assesses the activity, its effects, and then the proposals to avoid, remedy, or mitigate those effects. So the issue very much at heart of a consenting process is, will the prescribed process of mitigation, avoidance, or remedy of the activity, or the effects of the activity, meet the required outcomes as per the consent conditions? And if it doesn't, then you can load in more conditions to ensure that it does. So the analogy with Central Hawke's Bay is to say what you need to do is meet these particular outcomes. So here are some levels or some things that you must do. If the applicant turned up and said, well, we're going to do that in a method that our advice was that it's unlikely to achieve it, we could load in more conditions to make sure that they achieve it. But we couldn't go in and tell them, well, you need to have so many metres of pipe and a certain sort of pump. It's just to say we must ensure that the outcomes are being met. Right.
Can we just move on from this? I mean, Rick, in all seriousness, anyone who comes along with a big fat cheque and says, yeah, I know you're making a point, but we want to move this along. Thank you very much. Alan, you had a question. Thank you very much, so would I. Tom.
Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to move the recommendations as presented 1 through 5, and I have a substitution for number 6.
Do we all have that in front of us? I have it in front of me, the substitution.
Pardon me?
The run sheet. What about?
And I would have no issue with the individual items being voted separately when we get to that.
And that's what you'd like to do, Debbie, is you'd like to vote them separately, would you?
So if we could put up number 6, a fresh 6.
Put up the fresh 6. But you'd be happy to put 1 and 2 together, Debbie, I guess, because they're pretty generic. Yeah, I just want a discussion. No, I just want to have a discussion. I want to do this so that everybody's happy about it, Alan. So we know what Tom wants to do. What do you want to do, Debbie? Okay. We're moving the second up to do to move 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and to do
And this 6.
And this 6.
And that's been seconded.
And that's been seconded.
Can I ask for a point of clarification?
Mhm.
I need the definition of qualified sponsors.
So,
It goes to the question that I raised and that Rick has raised, that presumably some kind of screen test, whatever, is going to be applied by HBRIC and/or HBRC as to who an appropriate customer is, basically. That's all that says.
Okay, Tom, we have a mover to-
just a question though, clarification, and sorry, get to the mover, but we're authorising them to sell to any qualified sponsor. That means they can qualify the sponsor. Doesn't have to come back to council.
I don't know. I don't know what the legal.
Well,
I don't know who
requirements
wrote
would
that.
be.
Excuse me, Chair.
It seems
the
a few
live
others around the
feed's gone
table have
down.
seen
I'm
that
getting
before
texts
now.
from people in the community saying it's gone down.
What's gone down?
Live feed.
Oh, we've got Central Hawke's Bay watching us. Back on.
What happened?
May I speak to my motion?
Yes, you may. Neil is the second.
Neil.
Okay. We're
I'm
moving.
going to use
So the whole lot now.
I have a little helper here, so it's only 2 pages, but I want to be measured in what I have to say here. I have 10 minutes under the rules. I'll only use a few. Of course, I enthusiastically support a decision to liberate $66 million from the purse of the Ruataniwha water scheme. However, another recommendation before us, recommendation number 6, as presented, presents a classic case of talking out of both sides of our mouths. Where is the logic and political integrity in saying to the public, this council has had enough of this project, but our investment company, supposedly created to pursue our objectives and priorities, is authorized to continue searching for a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? On the one hand, we're saying no more ratepayer money for this scheme. On the other hand, we're authorizing, in fact, under this language presented, urging HBRIC to waste more time, energy, and money pursuing other avenues to progress this scheme to chase the rainbow. If we allow even $1 a week, let alone $100,000 per annum, which could be $800,000 over the period allowed, to be spent by HBRIC on progressing this project further, I think we're being hypocritical. Let's remind ourselves that cost and overstated financial return are not the only reasons this scheme faced strong public opposition and should not proceed. The Supreme Court decision was not about finances. It was about grabbing valuable land now given the highest conservation protection and trading it for pasture. The scheme isn't senseless only on financial grounds. It threatened further environmental degradation of the Tukey catchment from intensified farming. So I don't care if the Tooth Fairy steps forward with a check for $330 million, this scheme would still be a bad idea for the catchment in my judgment. And I hope this council would have the courage to make that clear today to our agent HBRIC, the farmers of Central Hawke's Bay, as well as the broader public. People want certainty about this. But if HBRIC were to be given this authority and urged to pursue the scheme, effectively urged to pursue the scheme, what are the terms for holding it accountable? How much can it spend? Over what period? What proportion of HBRIC's energies would be devoted to this fool's errand? What reports would we receive? What voice would we have regarding the new sponsor? Are the consents indeed transferable to anyone with a big enough checkbook? Would we simply wind up relitigating all the environmental issues again? The questions multiply. So much for certainty. Either we're serious about moving on or we're not. Indeed, if we and HBRIC expect to gain public trust and support for future HBRIC endeavors, Far better to free it cleanly from this damn albatross. It's a vote like this, if we fail to take a clear, definitive stand, that makes ratepayers distrustful of us as politicians. So I urge you to vote for my substitute language.
In fact, you're removing all 1 to 6 altogether. Yeah. With this as the amendment. Neil.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. While not sharing Councillor Belford's direction of travel in pursuing these recommendations, particularly recommendation 6, my position is that we face a certain reality about the current state of HBRIC, and the reality is that it's insolvent in real terms. Mr. Chair, we've placed a caveat in terms of the return of the port dividend through HBRIC, that should not be encumbered in any way, that it is passed directly to council. We have the scenario in front of us where we're holding on to an albatross, and that is HBRIC itself, not so much the intellectual property of the dam, but we've got a situation where essentially, and a lack of information, I would have to say, as to what the actual operating costs are for HBRIC. We don't know. We're told 100,000 in one breath, but we know they've got $5.5 million worth of debt. I'd like to know how that's going to be serviced. We're in a position, I suggest, Mr. Chair, where any reasonable, normal transaction or shareholder would immediately resolve from this company, would dump it and move on. That's a reality of what we're facing here. The normal disciplines of commerce seem not to apply in this case, and that's what greatly perplexes me as to why we would continue to bleed money via HBRIC and not do anything about it. And I had in my mind foreshadowed a resolution to suspend all trading of HBRIC right as of now, to not incur any further losses to the ratepayer. What we've got, Mr. Chair, is not only the write-down of 14 million on the Regional Council's balance sheet, but the obvious and inevitable scenario of a further 5.5 or $5.999 million by HBRIC itself pending very shortly. So in total, the ratepayer is now faced with a loss of shareholder value of something like $20 million. That would be a calamity in relative terms for any company out in the marketplace now, and yet it seems, even with this resolution and the actions here today, this council is going to enable HBRIC to continue to trade, continue to lose, and as a consequence, the ratepayer will face ongoing liability. My view, Mr. Chair, is that we ought to have taken much stronger action, and I'm hoping that as this report, as the annual plan report comes to fruition and the comment of the auditors is received, we will take the sensible step to shoot this dying horse and put it out of its misery and rescue the ratepayers accordingly.
I wish to move an amendment to 6, and my amendment would be to put a full stop after water storage scheme, full stop, and take out all the other words. Can I speak?
Yes, you can.
Can I say, look, I understand Councillor Belford's view that the way it's written here, we are encouraging HBRIC to go out and actively explore options to try and make this thing happen. And he disagrees with that. And I disagree with that too. But I think the two requirements he's put on there, that they can only do this if approached, sounds to me like the old soliciting law.
I'm not sure
And I don't understand.
Yeah, but that's what it was. They're not allowed to go and solicit business, and so they have to sit there and wait for someone to ask them. Well, I just think that's, just not a sensible way to do things. The other aspect of this is that qualified sponsors. Well, what's qualified? I don't get that, but I do think by stopping it there, we've got it neutral. The other thing about it is that he's probably right that in my estimation, that over time, the value of the intellectual property will diminish, but that shouldn't limit our ability if it's an appropriate sale, and that's what Hawke determined, to be able to on-sell it. I think the chances are very low, but I don't want to unnecessarily hamstring, so I want it to be neutral. As for the rest of the resolution, I think we've all said it. I just have to accept that the $14 million debt has to be written off. I don't accept the jaundiced view of Councillor Curtin about Hawke. I think there are issues for us to grapple with here, and we'll get through them over time. So that's my amendment, just to be more neutral about it. Let's move on.
Ed, do you want to speak to the amendment?
Yeah, just to the amendment. I would also like to speak to the substantive motion at some stage, but I do, other than the solicitation comments there, where the voices in Councillor Barker's head actually made it to his mouth for a change, I support the amendment.
We'll take out the speakers on the amendment. So we're dealing with the amendment. Speakers on the amendment. Tom, do you have to speak to the amendment?
What the amendment?
The amendment is the full stop, yeah. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I think there were two parts to the substantive motion that were in my mind, and one of them revolved around number 6, and taking the amendment gets right to the heart of it for me, because in my mind, yes, because I've been weighing up in my mind whether or not we should be able to sell the assets with intellectual property involved in the scheme, depending on it comes along. But I'm inclined to think there are a couple of things that we're missing from this particular motion. One was that I think that there should be a time frame in it, because if we're racking up, if Hawke's are racking up expenses of $100,000 a year, that's potentially another, whatever it is, $800,000 on top of the scheme which we're already writing off. So I was a bit disappointed with that, but I think it's also quite important that we do have some sort of qualified sponsor, because otherwise you could end up with some sort of shell company dealing with these things, and I don't think that would lead to the, if they weren't to be of financially sound when they put their hand up to present the cheque with a whole lot of zeros on the end of it, and they fell over as an investor, we left with a big block of concrete in the Makaroa River and all sorts of issues dealing with the fallout from that. So absolutely, I would still be supporting the approach of having to have suitably qualified sponsor, and also that rather than because that taking out the if approached words still allows Hawke to go out there and try to actively sell the thing, and I don't think that's the approach we should be taking. We should be sitting there waiting. If anyone's really keen, they can come along and make us a deal.
So you don't support the amendment? Any other speakers on the amendment? Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've spent a little bit of time thinking about this and hearing what fellow councillors have got to say, and I've decided that I will support this amendment. And there's a couple of issues just been raised by Councillor Bailey, which I think are fair issues to raise, but I think they're resolvable ones anyway. Firstly, in regard to the time frame, we actually can control the time frame around this anyway, because Hawke has to come to us with an annual statement of intent, and it would have to include something about this. If we decide the time has arrived that we just need to stop doing this, it's not worth spending the money to maintain the cost of the consents, then we can make sure that the statement of intent reflects that fact. So that's fine. And with regard to a qualified sponsor, my expectation would be that if Hawke did find a buyer for this, they would have to come to us and discuss the conditions around that buyer purchasing the intellectual property that was left. That is our opportunity to qualify the the buyer and set the conditions around any continuance of this project. So in my view, the amendment that's proposed here by Councillor Barker still leaves the regional council with pretty much total control over how this might play forward.
Any other speakers? Sorry? I'm saving my view for the press when I find out what everyone else says.
Can I move that the amendment be now put?
You've got a chance to.
I think everything's been said, without a doubt. This council will remain in the driving seat on all issues with our control over H-Brick and our control over the other aspects. So I've got no reservations about this.
Okay, I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour? Sorry? The Barker amendment to your amendment. So it changes it to that, Tom. But can I do that again, please? All those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? It's carried. Do you want to be recorded? Okay. So, Tom, that becomes part of the substantive motion, which is what you've moved.
So I will ultimately have last word, but other people may want to comment.
No, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Councillor.
Well, I'd like to speak to the now substantive motion, and I would simply say that I do intend to vote in favour of all of the line items in the motion, except for number 3. Now, the reason that I will vote at this stage against number 3, and I'll be interested to see how much support I've got, if any, is that there are what's the word? There are imminent decisions that will be made on the national scene that will become, in effect, landmarks that this scheme will be able to take into account. What I'm referring to is the general election, and in doing so I'd note that there are only 2 parties who have a cogent and, in my view, reasonable policy in regard to agriculture, horticulture and irrigation, and that's the National Party and New Zealand First. If Labor succeeds, they're wishy-washy all over the place. I would expect that they would terminate the irrigation acceleration investment fund.
I said they're going to.
If that is terminated, then the chances of the scheme being revived are fairly slight. So my opinion may change if and when that eventuality happens. But in the meantime, I would not want to do anything that presupposes that an organisation like the Irrigation Acceleration Fund, which already has a significant investment in this project, would not want or be able to, in conjunction with other partners, to revive the scheme, with the Regional Council being got out of the way.
Okay, Tom, so you're happy if we take these individually, 1 and 2 together? So I just want to clarify this. You're happy that we vote on each one individually? Yes. And you'll think, okay. Speakers on substantive, Debbie?
Thank you, Chair. There's a degree of inevitability, goodness me, get it right, about what's going on here today, and you'd have to be not very smart to not be able to do the maths, but the reality is that the tide's been turning for quite some time. What has surprised me is that we've received a paper here that has been presented in advance of waiting for advice from full and final advice from HBRIC. I would have thought it would have been prudent to have been doing it hand in hand with HBRIC. And I also caution, could we have some order here, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, guys, chit chat.
Thank you.
The speaker.
I also caution I'm a little bit surprised about the $14 million. As I say, I understand what you're saying, that we align it with the new legislation, and if we fully forgive debt, it won't be taxable, which is obviously prudent. But it's important that processes at this point don't let us become a weak seller of any outgoing assets of the Ruataniwha project. So I would proceed with caution. In terms of what we are looking to have lost with Ruataniwha no longer looking viable with investment from this council, I mean, what we're looking at is a loss of production in Central Hawke's Bay, and I'm not just speaking about production from the primary sector in terms of dry stock sheep and beef or dairying. I'm speaking about the production in terms of apples and horticulture. We've lost employment opportunities that the region is desperately screaming out for. We've lost the opportunity to have containers going through the port in increasing volumes. We've lost the opportunity for environmental flows, and most importantly to some of my Hiratonga colleagues, I would hope, is that we've lost the positive impacts on the lower Tuki, because they will be also suffering very, very severely without Ruataniwha. I appreciate that we're moving on, but two of the big things that we've lost in passing this over to a wider investor is, as a region, there will be no concession deed, so we won't have recourse to all of the opportunities that we did have through Regional Council for a concession deed, and there will be no long-term ownership of this asset for the region, and that's in the millions and millions of dollars. So I think that it's a sad day in terms of where we've landed with this project. I do believe it will go ahead in one vehicle or another. We've had the government come out and say that. We have a number of other investors who have invested significantly in their own due diligence, while we were informed by our Chief Executive that Council's due diligence was in the tune of 800,000. That's also well in excess for our institutional investor and also for the Crown Irrigation. So, and well in excess for the builder, the construction team who've put together going ahead with this project. So I do believe it's going to go ahead in one form or another, and it's going to be probably far better off without Council as a cornerstone investor in terms of getting on and the project being made a success. In terms of the recommendations, I will be supporting all bar number 3, because I think that we're going to still need some capital in here to maintain the value of Ruataniwha in terms of fiduciary duty and moving it on to its greatest possible advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to support all the resolutions as they sit there, because number 3 quite simply says, in light of the recent land swap decision, don't invest any more capital. Capital being the key word there. If that was to change, it's a whole new conversation, in my view. As far as some of the other commentary goes, I think we've just got to take this back to what we're talking about here. The fact of the matter is there's $14 million on the book that we're going to struggle to convince the auditor that it's actually a real asset. So we either impair it or write it off. The advice is write it off. Let's move on. I'm not sure what all the soapbox is about. This is quite a simple decision. It does not belt the scheme behind the ear at all. In fact, it's a council decision to deal with its own finances, and I think it's pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Chair. Being one of the councillors that sort of come late to this whole affair in terms of only being in my first term, I think it's a real salutary lesson about how we work through investments and about how we should look carefully when we're going through a scheme such as the Ruataniwha, to look at different exit ramps that become available, and that we should be taking them at the time. Because I think back in 2013, when this whole issue of the land swap first came up, the investment that had been made in the Ruataniwha was around $5 million. We're now sat with a total cost of about $20.3 million. And I think that was I still go back and say I think that was an appalling decision to be made at the time, to continue to proceed with the scheme without being 100% certain that the land available was actually there. I wouldn't certainly go and build a house without making sure that I owned the land that I was going to build the thing on, and that's exactly what's happened here. So I'm, like I say, I think it's a real salutary lesson for me to be aware of as we move forward in the future with different proposals, to be well aware that when an exit ramp presents itself, we should be seriously thinking about taking it. But I'm also with Councillor Wilson. At the end of the day, it's a pretty straightforward decision. We've been asked to do a financial thing in terms of writing down the $14 million debt, so I'll be supporting all the motions. Thank you.
Peter?
Just a very short comment from me, Chair. I also agree with Councillor Wilson. This is a pretty easy decision, and in lots of ways it comes as a relief after what's been a pretty ugly process in my view for the past 3 or 4 years. So as the All Black coach once said, it's time to flush it down the dunny and move on.
Are there any other speakers? I have a couple of small comments. Debbie, I don't know whether you were at the workshop when the HBRIC directors came, and it was them that actually recommended, in the first instance, the write-down of the $14 million to us. And I specifically asked the chartered accountant, who is a director, whether he thought that was the new director, and he said it was the best option. Well, I'm just saying that we haven't unilaterally decided this. In fact, the opposite is absolutely the case. And I think, with great delight, I think it's the first time that Councillor Wilson from Wairua and I have 100% agreed on a decision based around Ruataniwha. So we're moving along. Okay, so we're going to move. I want to move these things to give everyone a chance. Oh, certainly, Tom. The last word.
It's the word was the thing, singular, Tom, not plural. I intend to vote for the 6 recommendations as they now stand. And my remarks have more to do with looking forward. Councillor Hewitt is entitled to her view of the benefits of this scheme. Those have been debated now for several years, and different views have prevailed on that. Case closed. Looking forward, we have varying aspirations for HBRIC, ranging from Neil wanting to axe it, through to others who have very grandiose aspirations for what HBRIC could now attend to. I think it's politically important, and the reason I objected to 6 as written, it is politically important for HBRIC, if it is going to have any credibility going forward, to shed itself of this scheme as thoroughly and rapidly as it possibly can. I think we need to make clear that there's a clean cut here, and that we don't have a situation where we have conflicting agendas between the council itself and what is supposedly its creature. And I see this as an issue going forward as to how we approach HBRIC. If a previous council set it off on a mission, a number of councillors wound up disagreeing with that mission. It created a inherently antagonistic form of conflict, basically, and it's hard to see that wouldn't
always represent a threat here, that what one council thinks is a splendid idea and what have you, another council might not. And so if, as I look forward, the scheme is done, finished, what we're really focused on now is, are there better uses of $66 million? Is HBRIC an appropriate vehicle for developing those notions, or is some other institutional arrangement or process better able to do that? I think that's still an open question, and that the history of this scheme, we should learn something from it on the one hand, and on the other hand, we should wipe it off the slate as rapidly as we can. There's a lot of skepticism out there as to how an entity like that gathers a life of its own, as that's the way it's been perceived by folks who have opposed this scheme all along. And are we just going to have more replays of that when people expect us as a council to really be in the driver's seat? And that's why I feel so strongly about that other wording, and the wording in here, which has kind of like, we don't want it to happen, but wink and nod. If you guys can come up with cash, go for it. Which wipes out the whole argument about the land swap. Wipes out the fact that there are environmental objections to this. I reluctantly accept where we've come out on 6. It's not clear enough, it's not firm enough in my own personal judgment, and I hope we don't wear a cost for that going forward.
Thank you. Okay, recommendations 1 and 2, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Unanimous. Recommendation 3, all those in favour? Aye. Against? 2 against. Do you want your recorded?
Did he say yes or no?
The recorded with division, all those in favour? Aye. Those against? 2. Thank you very much. Recommendation 4. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? It's unanimous. Item 5. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous. Item 6, which is the amendment, which was laboured over, so the final amendment. With the full stop, all those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Now, we will move to item 6. I don't know whether I've got to go and talk to... Yes, thank you, Manton. I don't know whether I've got to go and talk to the press now.
They said lunchtime, they said.
Are they now? Rick, I've got to go and talk to the press. Can you take over as chair for a... Sure. You're going to move seats? You don't have to move seats, Rick. It's very... it's very intimidating to me when you have to come back and kick you out. Threatening. That would be good.
Okay, we're up to item, which one, sheet?
Number 6.
Item 6.
The financial report for 12 months.
Yes, and who are you going to lead this off?
No, I'll leave it to Jess and Manton.
Jess and Manton, you've got introductory comments. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, item 6. So the annual report is ready for review. The usual financial report for the 12 months to 30th of June 17, and Manton's going to take us through and answer any questions.
Manton?
Great. We'll kick off.
People have got the report.
Yes.
I presume they've spent their wee hours studying it.
I would hope so.
Do you want to study it? Do you want to go through and restate what's here on paper, or do you want to move straight to questions?
Up to you. I'm quite happy to take just questions if they pop up. Or
Okay, do you want to do that in parts?
Sure. Yeah, so there's two parts to this report, one being the usual quarterly report that we give you, and this is obviously the wrap-up for the last financial year. So that's the first portion of the report, and the second is our draft annual report, which we are giving to Audit, and need your adoption to do that, for them to run their ruler over everything. Just a note on that, this is purely our annual report for council. We have yet to get HBRIC's accounts to consolidate, so just keep that in mind. Obviously, we're waiting on some of those decisions that we just talked about. So,
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess first, if you wanted to touch on anything from the normal operating report for those 12
I'll take
months.
you through the questions if you like.
Great.
Okay. Councillors, you've all had the papers, you've read them overnight, highlighted. Questions? So, you question Councillor Dick.
Are we dealing with that as well, the big thick one? Yes?
Well, let's do the financial report first, then we'll
Okay.
come to the big thick one second. Let's start with the skinny one. Questions on the skinny one? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. On page 11, valuations of leasehold's interest as at 30th June 2017. Did that include the cross leases?
Yes, that includes all available leases.
Okay.
At that stage.
The other thing in that respect, because I'm interested in the methodology, because at the end of the day, we've been talking about these cross-lease sections and how difficult they are to get rid of. So I assume that affects their value in an adverse way.
Trudy's down the back. She's looking at me.
The value is the value.
That's right.
Yeah, the sections with the section, the houses on top don't actually, there's no value. This is the value of the section at that date rather than individual property.
Right. Yep. No, it's okay.
Thanks, Ray.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, no questions on the attachment. Attachment one, we'll cover all that. All right, let's move to the thick report. Councillor Dick, you have a question on the thick report?
Hang on, I'm just catching up here. Can you just go to the works group?
Is it on the
And,
skinny report?
yes, it is still, sorry.
Okay, we'll do it in two parts.
Page 12, the works group, so all of their profit was going to be moved straight over. Were there no capex requirements there, James?
Yes, there were. So that is X, the CapEx requirements. So they have, they've had a number of capital upgrades which have been improved in recent times.
Councillor Hewitt has pointed out another one, which is quite significant. On page 141, sorry. That's 141 at the bottom of the page. Grants distributed to Ngāti Pāhuera Rivers Initiative 773 and 22241. Can you tell me what that is?
Right, so a couple of years ago we received...
Sorry, can I just interrupt?
Sure.
141, each of these pages has got two numbers. Are we referring to the slightly higher number or the number towards
One
the
at the
bottom?
bottom.
And it's 141. Okay.
141 on the page. The document is page 138, the document, but in the council printout is page 141. Yeah. Okay.
Right, okay.
Right, so we received from central government a $2 million fund that we were to hold on behalf and to pay out on receipt of reported work done for that. So it's not ours to do, we're just the facilitator in between, so that's essentially
okay.
what that is.
Any other questions?
Well, just by way of explanation, I think they set up a little nursery there for their planting.
But point's being made, is not council money, it's money, Crown money we hold on trust.
Yeah, you owed us.
No, you do it. I'll back you up.
Thank you. If we go to page 5 on this larger report, and in the second column, there's a bullet point that states moves towards regional oil and gas prohibition was strongly supported by councillors. Well, that's actually incorrect. I'm just speaking about in the introduction. There's a statement here that's.
Look, the resolution from the Regional Planning Committee, that subsequently endorsed by the Council, was to initiate a program of work to increase the level of regulation around oil and gas production in the region. That work is obviously underway. It was not unanimously supported by councillors, but it was a resolution of Council. This is possibly shorthand, and I guess, Councillor, you might be objecting to the word strongly?
Yes, because
And
it wasn't strongly.
And prohibition is inappropriate as well.
So it moves towards, and look, I appreciate that it's not the full set of caveats about what we're doing in a reasonably large work program. More than happy to take that away and come up with a set of words which better describe what has been agreed to.
Why wouldn't you just take strongly out?
Look, I appreciate the point being made by Councillor Dick that moves towards an oil and gas prohibition. While we've used the words moves towards to, I guess, caveat it somewhat, it may give an inaccurate impression of what is actually being undertaken, which is an evaluation of the regulations and the various different options we have around regulating that activity further, which include potentially prohibition, but the council has not at this point in time resolved to prohibit. Indeed, it can't until it receives that advice.
So you'll just pick that up more accurately. Thank you.
Just
The
while we're on
next-
page 5, Debbie,
Oh, yes.
in the bullet points down below, the bottom 2 bullet points on the right-hand side, submitted to central government on X, Y, Z and invested in X and Y. I assume there's something to go to fill in those variables.
That's correct. The point to make on this is the draft. It's not the final, and there's more work to do. The emphasis of activity has been on preparing the financial information for the auditors, rather than some of the supporting narrative, which will be finalised. It's not actually clear to me whether the chairman's even cited this at this point in time. It is very much a working draft.
Just before we get, you got a further question on 5?
Oh no, the same issue though, just that you'll be updating on page 135 and it's all in yellow, so that is to be updated, I presume. Okay, thanks.
I'll come back to your questions shortly if I can, Debbie, but I just want to say, has anybody else got any other things on page 5?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say that if that wording's not changed, then certain parties in Wellington reading this within and without of government would be highly perturbed.
Point made. Can I just say on page 5, I've got 2 things about this. I want to restate my age-old thing. I've harped on this for a long time, and is that I've always felt that having a chair's report separate from the chief executive's report is the way to go. The chair says things on behalf of the council in terms of what it is, because that represents councillors, and the chief executive's report is about the operational side of it. Anyway, I want you to reflect on that. I disagree with having both reports in the same thing. Second, which is my point I've made again before a number of times, is you've written this with the James Palmer chief executive first and the Rex Graham the chair second. I do not agree with that. The chair is the chair, and they should be, in anything, be first mentioned because they are the head of this organisation.
And I agree with you, Chair, that you have disagreed with this before.
Right. Anyhow, now, quick, just make this point. Now, Debbie Hewitt, you've got any other questions you want to raise on this?
Thank you. I'm just, Manton, I'm just wondering, I have been through it, but I note that we've outlined how many meetings the Maori Committee Chair has attended, but was councillor attendance in here somewhere and I missed it because I went back a couple of times and looked?
We have historically had the meeting attendance kind of register. Our take from council was that we were to take that out this year. It's not a requirement that we have to have. It's just something that we've had in there in the past. Yeah, if that feeling's changed, we can put it back in. No. I like to double check. If it is in there, yeah. And I think it caused more problems than it potentially solved. So.
Does mine stay in or out?
Any other questions, Councillor Hewitt?
No, thank you. I think a comment.
Councillor Bailey, questions? Councillor Bevan?
Yes, I've got a couple. I was going to raise the same issue as Councillor Hewitt's raised in regard to the yellow highlighted part of page 135. And the question is really, is this a snapshot as at the 1st of July, or is this supposed to contain updated information insofar as we can give it, because that's now incorrect?
Yeah, so the reason I've highlighted that is that note will change depending on positions taken in the next. Yeah. So it is a position at 30 June, but if any subsequent events happen between sign-off of the accounts by audit, they're always taken into consideration. So that's obviously the Supreme Court decisions come through. That's why we have to say, actually, in light of that, what do we think the real position is at 30 June?
Okay, my next question is actually 2 pages over, so it's 138. We're looking at the numbers down the very bottom. Note 5B. Under the Hawke's Bay Endowment Land Empowering Act 2002, revenue from leasehold endowment land can only be used for the improvement, etc., of Napier Harbour or Regional Council's coastal marine area. Are we referring to the leasehold land here, the Napier leasehold land?
Yes, we are.
So how on earth were we able to earmark it for Ruataniwha?
And there is some legal opinion on this that we could dig out for you. The fact that we are still spending more than we are receiving in those particular areas was the justification for those. So we are still using that income that we're receiving and spending that money in those areas. Vaguely, we can.
Revenue is
must be very vague. It's a long way inland.
Revenue is different from capital.
Well, it's not. Yes, it is. Okay, that's a legally nice argument, but doesn't hold much water.
Well, you put your cash in the bank and you get interest.
Anyway, bottom line is you actually received legal advice that justified earmarking that money, because we're going to run into the same problem effectively with the $66 million that's still left. Now, one could have a discussion about what percentage of that has come from the leasehold land capitalisation, but we might need to seek further legal advice as part of our long-term plan process once a determination on how we want to use that $66 million has been made.
Yeah, that would probably be prudent. Yeah.
Could I just earmark that and just say to the Chief Executive, you need to take a note of that and make sure that it's just covered up when we come back to the issue. Good point, Peter. Any other questions? Councillor Bevan? Councillor Wilson? Councillor Belford? Questions? Councillor Curtin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Well, what happens? Well, let's make sure the simple and easy ones.
I'm simple.
And you're easy.
And easy. Mr. Chair, perhaps James could help me here. Just in terms of process for this draft report, it goes to the Audit and Risk Committee and then back to Council for adoption?
That's correct. The only thing I just checked, does it go through corporate and strategic on the way through as well?
Yes. As part of the recommendations of the
Audit and Risk, so yeah, so three steps.
3 steps.
Yeah,
so
once we've had feedback from the
we've got plenty of opportunity to come back
we do.
to the content, particularly if you're going to update with the HBRIC information. Can I take you to, perhaps, James, this is also in your orbit, the issue raised by...
what page?
This is pages 1 to 6, whatever it is, the introductory statements.
Yep.
Following on from Councillor Barker's commentary on this, I'd like to go to the very last comment on page 6 of that document, responsibility number 4. In the opinion of the Council and Management Hawke's Bay Council, the annual financial statements for the year to the 30th of June fairly reflect the financial position and operations of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So that's the undertaking that is made in this report. Is that correct, Mr. Chief Executive?
Certainly, and it will be something that will be signed up to at the completion of this process.
Thank you. So therefore, in the light of that introduction, we've got a number of, if you like, smaller issues, but I think there are very substantive issues that are not referenced in that commentary. Firstly, the Ruataniwha outcome itself, which hopefully will find its way into that dialogue. That's going to happen, and the impact on council as a result. But secondly, in terms of operation, the water situation in Havelock North, which I would have said into that assessment. Are you happy to consider that?
So
we're talking about the commentary and at the commencement of the document. So report both from the Chief Executive and from the Chair.
Right. Look, I'm just unclear what page you're working on, because certainly reference to the Havelock North drinking water contamination event is the very second sentence of the Chair and Chief Executive's introduction.
Yes, that's what I thought. Yeah, I'm having to look at the page as well. The other people.
Sorry, so are you talking about the Chair and Chief Executive's introduction?
That's
Councillor?
correct, yes.
Right. So you'd like to see more emphasis on Havelock North?
I think given that the nature of that event in terms of operation, that's why I went to the very last reflection of the position of the operating of the council. So, and if I can, with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, make a further comment and question around the nature of this report itself, being vast in its nature and also very input focused. For example, if we're looking at assessing and reporting on performance, if I could take you to page 21 or 24, take your pick, and that's the strategic planning group of activities. To emphasise the point I'd like to make, level of service measure, East Coast Hill Country strategy. I'm wanting to know, has there been a reduction in sedimentation further down the page in relation to climate change and carbon emissions? Have we reduced any carbon emissions? So that my point is this, Mr. Chair, that what we've got are things we did during the year, but no reference or description of achievement in terms of outcomes. And I think the whole document needs a total revamp in terms of its purpose. Have you any comments, Mr. Chief Executive?
Councillor, I share your concerns and observations. The annual report reflects the annual plan. The annual plan reflects the long-term plan, and as indicated to councillors in our workshop last week, it is our strong intention to, in the upcoming long-term plan, focus more heavily on outcomes and not just outputs, and to consolidate our level of service measures and required actions down considerably, so that they are more consolidated around areas of outcome, and that we don't report slavishly through our annual plans and annual reports on large volumes of granular activity to which ratepayers cannot see a direct connection back to outcomes.
I just add to that, the report reflects our work style of work and our measuring systems. To ask them to go backwards now and historically try and do a different set of measuring systems is impossible.
Oh, look, I was looking forward, Mr. Chair, to next year's report, really.
So you thought that this report needs to be this report?
I was used as an example, Mr. Chair. That's all I want to say, Mr. Chair.
Chairman, I've got something in a similar vein, and I regret to say that this relates to my portfolio, transport. Page 104, There are two performance targets on that page. One is achieve an annual 1% increase in patronage, and the second is achieve an annual 1% increase in passenger kilometres travelled. Now, all of the progress reports, everything is achieved, but in fact, there's absolutely no measurement or reporting on those particular performance targets. Now, it's the first time I've seen it. I'll be raising it at the Transport Committee meeting today, but I wonder if Mr. Palmer or anyone has any comment.
So the way the table's set up and the way we report on this is that it's the required action that we're reporting on. So we're reporting on whether the required action was achieved, and in this case, each of these are saying that they are. And I guess this goes to the point made by Councillor Curtin. What we don't, therefore, is link through to the outcomes, which is the performance target. It's the nature of how we report to you whether or not we have delivered the actions you have paid us to deliver. Whether or not they achieve the outcome is I guess, a question for councillors to consider in setting targets going forward and determining the work program for the council. It's an area that we could do better in, I think, in terms of providing advice to you about whether or not outcomes are being achieved.
Well, it's just a nonsense, isn't it?
It's the way we currently are structured in terms of the LTP.
But it's a nonsensical structure.
I think it's less than helpful for us to have a lack of strong causal link between outcomes and outputs.
Well, we'll fix that next year, shall we?
Could I just come to a couple of things I had on the way through? Could I take you to page 16, 13 of the report? Accountability information. Could someone just explain to me, I think I get this graph here on the right. Can I explain to me the large orange block on the right-hand side? What is this telling me?
These are some set benchmarks which we have to do every year. Colour would be great. I think I know which one we're talking about.
Yeah.
So a lot of these were developed, and I'm only assumed with TAs in mind of how they run things and how they do things. But these are the us doing exactly what we're told, and they really do not provide too much information.
That's answering a different question.
Sorry, I will answer the question as well.
The question is, what does this block tell me?
The reason I'm stalling is because I'm not sure if it tells you a heck of a lot. And that was my excuse for why we have to put it in.
That's what I was trying to get. This is that several of these graphs here don't make any sense at all.
They really don't.
And I don't care if we have to. I just want on them some commentary to try and explain. So a person picks this up and has a look at it. What does it tell me? And I could say, now, similarly, over the page, on page 15 and 18, we've got in the biosecurity a regulation. We've got a big slice there, red, off track. Now, I'm not quite sure what off track means, but there's no direct link from there to where I can get advice onto what that means. I don't want you to explain it to me now, but what I do want you to find is, so when you've got the C note such and such somewhere, I think you'll find it way back over and when we get the reporting where it is, but I would like you to tag that so a person can figure the way through this. I see biosecurity has got a perfect record. They should get a pay rise, and everybody else is on watch. There's a couple of other things I had here too. So a number of things which I just didn't think we had worked through really well. Anyway, seeing as Councillor Curtin's correct, we've got about 3 or 4 different opportunities to comment on this. I'll leave those comments at that point. All right. Does that mean we've got to read this several times? Yes, you're going to read it several times until we get it right.
We'll point out the variances. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. So that's the questions. Let's move on to the commentary. Would someone like to move?
Mr. Chairman, Can I raise a topic? I'm coming back to...
Is this a question or is it a statement?
Well, it's a question and a comment.
This is the fourth
Page
sentence.
12,
All right.
our general funded operating position end of year result. Now, I'm aware that there have been a number of things that have happened during the year that have adversely affected our bottom line. But what I'm concerned about is looking forward, and I'm looking forward at one particular aspect of our costs, and that is the cost of governance and advisory services. Now, in my observation, I would say those costs have probably multiplied by 3 over the last 6 or 7 years. And for example, we have 20 odd paid positions in Maori Advisory and Regional Plan Committee. We've currently, for some reason or other, got 8 HBRIC directors. We have a number of exercises that involve the input of advisory people and hopefully volunteers like TANK, Coastal Policy, Regional Transport. And the question I'd like to ask is that are the people, the non-council, non-staff people involved in TANK, Coastal Policy, Regional Transport, are they being paid?
Chief Executive?
Pardon?
I'm just calling the Chief Executive to answer your question.
So,
Yes.
in relation to the tank participants, and I believe it's similar for the coastal strategy participants, as they are receiving a small sum to effectively reimburse their transport costs. It was previously petrol vouchers. There was concern from IRD about petrol vouchers being potentially a taxable form of income, so we've gone to a different model. So it's a notional payment, but it's not a significant payment. But look,
they're not being paid meeting allowances.
They're being paid for each meeting, and I from memory it's $100 a meeting for tank participants, and I heard Peter say 125 for the 120 for the coastal participants. So relatively low, but look, I think, Councillor, your observations about the increase in governance costs is accurate. They have grown in recent times. A lot of that reflects the degree of participation we have by both community and tangata whenua in decision making around the council table. So it is an area of growth, and it is an area that we want to discuss with council in the long-term plan going forward. The staff are very mindful of the costs that we do incur through the frequency of meetings, and one of the proposals that we're currently looking at is whether in the next year we reduce the frequency of both council meetings and regional planning committee meetings to something like a 6-weekly basis rather than a monthly basis, and have fewer slightly longer meetings rather than the current relatively intensive rolling schedule of council meetings, RPC meetings, committee meetings, and the various other bodies that we have running as well that councillors are involved in.
Okay, I'm not saying that some of these costs were unavoidable. What my observation is that I think the pendulum has in fact swung too far. And incidentally, just to complete the question, I'll answer one of my questions myself. The advisory members of the Regional Transport Committee do not receive anything. They provide their services gratis.
Can we, we've got any further questions?
I'm just happy to move if you
Councillor Wilson.
Oh, I might have missed something here, Chair, but on page 137, page 140, termination benefits, what does that mean?
Where are you up to?
Top general disclosures.
I got it.
137, bottom 140.
Right.
Here we are.
Happy to answer that. Yeah, if you've got- yeah. So these are some general disclosures which we have to make. So all the remuneration for yourselves and our key management, which is our executive team. That's what makes up that key management compensation. So that is all salaries, KiwiSaver, FBT, everything paid out to those people during the year. So termination would be severance payments and the like.
Any commentary about how many people that would be?
Potentially further on.
168. Yep, it's all there. Any further questions? Councillor Curtin, you're moving. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bailey.
Just to emphasise, Mr Chair, that the reports do go through a significant process, and there will be further opportunities to comment and make adjustments.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I'm so looking forward to having to read through this again twice.
Contrary, no. Carried. We're now on to item 7, and I hand the chair back over to the chairman.
Okay, team. Item 7, setting of the rates.
Okay, Trudy's going to take us through the item 7, setting of the rates.
As you know, the rates have all been finalised, just about to push the button, but I just need a resolution from you to say go ahead. I don't need to go through everything because it's all what you agreed and did. It's just, I need a resolution, that's all. So,
Are there any questions, or do we move straight? Yeah, there was a question, right?
Yes, my question is, I see that we have a lawyer's opinion.
yes.
From Sainsbury, Logan and Williams. I would like to know how much this cost us and if it's of any value whatsoever. I would have thought that this council, having been through the motion of setting its rates many times, would know how to structure a resolution and would have to, would be able to do it without a legal opinion. And if we had to do an opinion on whether we're doing it right, we would have asked our auditors. I just don't see. Sorry? I've had a review of it. I was befuddled by this. So.
Oh, it was $800 to get the opinion, and it's been a requirement that comes up in rating conferences that we get a legal opinion every year. We actually choose Sainsbury Logan over Simpson Grierson just purely for the cost, but it is something that is done every year.
Well, just because we do it every year, I can't understand why we need to do it. I'm not blaming
Yeah.
you.
No.
I just think it's nuts. I think it's just I'd be love to be Sainsbury Logan, $1,000 for that. I just run off the word processor, it'll be done in 30 seconds. Jeez. Sorry? Yes, exactly.
So just a follow-up.
Point taken. Is it a requirement, or is it just to protect?
It's just to protect council that we've got a legal opinion, really.
But what would it protect us from?
Good point.
I just don't get it. No, I'm done. Happy to move the resolution.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Do we have a seconder, Councillor Bailey? All those in favour? Aye. Against? We're missing our secretary, but you have a resolution of council. It's just not recorded properly yet.
Can I just ask the chief executive to make a note of that about the legal opinion. Can we just,
So we need to say,
I'd certainly put the $800 of the staff beer and betting fund than to do this. I think we'd get much better benefit out of it.
okay, we'll move to item 8.
Point of order, Mr Chair. I think we do need a secretary.
Well, it's just not recorded. I've got the move and the seconder.
That's right.
And unanimous.
And it was
And
unanimous.
it's recorded on the tape.
Yeah.
I think if you look at standing orders, you'll need a secretary.
No, you don't. The chief executive is the person here. The person there is the chief executive's delegate. We've got the main person.
Well, shall we ask the chief executive why we don't have a secretary?
Look, I have absolutely no idea, but based on her general diligence in the role, I suspect that this is an urgent matter that.
Here she comes. We had a resolution to support recommendation, item 7, moved by Rick, second by Paul, and it was unanimous.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we have item 8 then. Do we? Is that what we got? Yeah.
Yes.
Elected members. Oh, yes. We've had vigorous discussion on this already.
Oh, have you? I'll look forward to that. Yeah, sorry, you're getting all the finance people this morning. It's very exciting for you, I'm sure. At least this one is giving you something back. So this is the annual determination which we get from the Remuneration Authority, laying out what the salaries can be for the current year that we're working through. So they're a little bit behind the 8 ball this year, a little bit slow on that. So we are, just bear in mind that this will be backdated to 1st of July for anything that we talk about. That may be why. There you go. So I can briefly just talk through the variances. It's probably good that you do know, if you don't already, about a couple of these. There's a couple of new things on the allowance side of that. So basically the general increase is 1.7 across the board. So our current setup remains. There's no obligation to make any decisions on that at the moment. That will come up in the next round of these things. But they have had a really good look at mileage allowance and some of the other allowances. So we'll briefly just go through those. And you may have noticed that we withheld travel allowances last pay just for this reason, because we would have had to backdate and muck around with it. So we have, we'll be doing those shortly. So the mileage rate has dropped slightly in line with the IRD rate. They're about a year behind, so you are getting a better rate than what you're getting with the IRD, but that's fine. The major change there is if anyone has an electric vehicle, there's a separate rate for that now. Not sure if... That is a good point. Fully. But anyway, if you are making decisions on which vehicles to choose, that may come into your thinking. And the mileage distance has changed, which a couple of our more travelled councillors will be very happy about. So basically they've taken opinions from a lot of people saying that councillors are no longer... They've historically taken the opinion that you are employees. And so your travel to and from the office is kind of just part of what you do as an employee, and travel distances are less because you're an employee. They've changed that to actually more working like a self-employed person, which is probably more accurate. Which you are, yeah, technically to the letter of the law you are. And so there's been 2 major changes. They've removed that 30k threshold that we deduct from any travel to and from the office. So that basically means that anyone of you, and especially the people locally in Napier, can claim all your mileage. So to and from this office, anything council related, as per our policy, can now be claimed. We don't deduct any threshold. It's just what you travel is what you can claim. So that will be a bit of a change for some of you. So Alan, you can claim your travel now if you so wish, and we will change that travel form to just provide maybe another column which says, kilometres travelled. If you could fill those in for us, because it's no longer just from home. Perfect. Has it got the...
Thank you, man. I think that's
right, we
fine.
can do
We
it.
understand all this. Fenton, I'd like to ask you a question.
If you ride your electric bike. I'm not sure. We haven't got a rate for that. And sorry, the other last part of that is the distances. The distance is increased from getting that paid that higher rate. that's probably the main things to just point out.
Thank you, Brandon.
Questions
I
on
just want
this?
to ask Fenton a question.
Oh, sorry.
5,000 Ks, what do you do?
Which I don't know yet, because I had your car, if you think back, for 3
Mm.
months of last financial year, so
What were you doing on average then?
35 and
35. Debbie, what would you do?
35 to 40, but I was attending a lot of meetings in Waipapa.
Oh, yeah, well. Debbie, what do you...
The up to 10,000 is very pleasing. It covers me.
It covers you?
Yes.
It won't cover me,
It won't cover you?
but it'll
no.
be close.
Okay.
I've got a question. I see that we are supposed to be paid in 9.11 elected members to supply with a rain jacket bearing the council logo. I raised this at the last.
He's been nagging away.
I raised this at with the last 3 years for the chief executive and got a mouthful of mumbles and no jacket. I see that. I see it's still here. So does that mean I'm now entitled to 2 jackets bearing the
Can you please
company
get
logo?
Rick and Paul a jacket? XXL.
You should just supply everyone with a jacket, as it's required to do. I don't understand this.
So when this was last raised, I followed it up and I was advised that all councillors after the last election had been asked about jackets. That's what I was told, but right, okay, so you haven't been.
I've been asking for one since 2003.
Oh, he's got
Okay,
4
guys,
jackets.
just remember...
We'll deal with it today.
We are being recorded and, yeah, we do not want to make a big fuss about jackets.
We want beanies too, Chair.
Excellent.
What about taxi
Okay.
cards,
Um,
Mr Chair?
We all...
We go out on field trips. I just think we turn up on a place, go to meetings. Council turns up with the council logo on. It's stating who you are. It's a good advertisement for the council.
No, and it's an excellent idea. We just don't want to spend too much time on it, councillor. That's all I'm saying.
Mr
So
Chair?
I'm prepared to move 1 to 4 and let 5 lie on the table.
Thank you, Debbie. Do we have a second up?
What about the taxi cards?
Mr Chairman, I'll second it,
Yes.
but I'd like to speak to this Remuneration Murray Committee and co-chair Regional Planning Committee.
Certainly.
And in that regard, I don't believe it should be discussed here, but I have a feeling that the answer is that those 2 positions, and they are quite different, should be subject to an independent job appraisal and remuneration assessment.
It's not a bad idea. Okay,
Done by
Debbie,
an
you're the
independent.
mover. Thank you, Alan, you're the seconder. Do you wish to speak to it before we open it up?
Thank you. I agree that the matter we've left lie on the table shouldn't be discussed here, so I'm happy to leave it at that. It is pleasing to see that distance, remuneration for distance representation has been remedied, so that I think that's fair and reasonable. And if it still needs to be pushed out from 10,000 Ks to accommodate further distance, then it should be looked at. But yeah, I think that's fair and reasonable. So thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I'll come to you, Paul. I'll make a comment too. I'm really pleased about that too. I have been concerned for some time that our most northern and our most southern members have been they have to travel such a long way. It's bad enough that I have to travel from Havelock North. But so I'm very conscious about that, and I'm really pleased this has changed. The other thing is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but interesting that we're giving ourselves a pay rise after we've just written off 14 million of shareholders' capital. Doesn't quite sit well with me, but apart from that, I guess we've got to go forward. Any other speakers? Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, and thank you, Councillor Barker, for bringing up the issue of the jackets, that I would love to have my jacket and wear it with pride when I'm out and about in the community and representing the council, because I think it is really important that we get recognised for who we represent.
Thank you, Paul, for raising jackets again. That's wonderful. Mike, you...
Yes, can I just ask Councillor Dick if indeed the CEO and the chair handle the, rather than getting an independent person, it would be a lot cheaper in terms of the advice for the my position in the regional planning a co-chair.
Well, the only comment I'd make is that we're not remuneration specialists. It's an option.
Okay, I don't want to labour this one. Rick.
I
You got a quick
just
comment?
want to say, I have absolute confidence in the chair and the chief executive to handle a conversation with the individuals concerned, and I'd leave it at that.
Appreciate that. Tom?
I just want to say, I'm tired of being mistaken as a Japanese tourist when I'm out around the district. So I want to, proper outfit also.
You want the...
From the chamber.
Are you saying you want the jacket too, Tom? Is that... Okay. This is the most compelling subject that we've had today.
Long as it's made out of locally sourced wool, Chair.
Yeah. David, do you want to just wind up? Otherwise, we'll move to the vote. Thank you. All those in favour of accepting recommendations? Aye. Against? Carried unanimously.
Lunch is ready.
Lunch is ready. We're going to stop for lunch. Righto? Take jackets. Take jackets.